Hey there, welcome to episode 98 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo. We are recording episode 98 on the final day of 2024. It is December 31, Tuesday, December 31, 2024. The time is about 12:26 p.m. here in Vegas, 27. And today's episode will be hopefully brief. I mean, it is New Year's Eve. You are not listening to this on New Year's Eve, certainly, but it is being recorded then, so we'll factor that into the runtime of today's episode. But today we are talking about the contributing document, contributing in all caps by convention. So it is in the title, the contributing document, which spells out the rules of the road for contributing to our open source projects. It's a totally normal thing, which we'll get into a little bit. Projects, initiatives, component projects, initiatives, any other entity that's in our purview. Having things written down is always a good idea. An attorney told me that once in writing. The Innovate for Vegas Foundation, hopefully you are aware, but if not, is a Nevada nonprofit, 501c3 public charity, Nevada nonprofit corporation, indeed. 501c3 public charity. Our purpose statement on file with the authorities is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. Civic volunteerism. So if we can do cool things to make our neighborhoods and the people around us better off, and if that can extend to parts unknown, the precise boundaries of Vegas, after all, are always a mystery. And so, where am I in Vegas? Maybe. No, that part of the reason to have some clarity in a contribution document is because we are trying to encourage participation in our initiatives from beyond the Vegas area. So, what does it mean to be a part of the organization, and what do my contributions mean to all of that, and so on? So, spelling some of that out, it's always, not always, hopefully, but it's a work in progress to this day. Hopefully we'll hit version 1 and we can let it stew a bit. So hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes and a collection of links. There are 4 that I've been including in our episodes lately, plus 2 regarding this contributing document itself. So I'll read the summary from the show notes and we'll run through the links really quickly and get on with the show. The sooner we start, the sooner we end, and it is New Year's Eve. Summary. It is rarely a bad idea to have things written down, and this is most definitely true when it comes to setting some ground rules for contributions to open source initiatives. And, well, our contributing document is almost ready. Almost. The links for today's episode include a link to our homepage, innovateforvegas.org. Innovate, no space, no dots, no dashes, no hyphens. For same deal, Vegas, Innovate for Vegas, all one word. .org is our homepage. The contributing document needs to be sort of transformed from a single markdown document to something that's a little bit more easily consumed to a web visitor. So that will happen once we reach version 1, I suppose. Visit our homepage for information about our organization and so on. That's, you know how that works. Project Act, project-act, act.info, is information about our Project Act initiative, the Autonomous Cohort Tessellation, which is aimed at discovery, connecting, communicating, and collaborating between civic volunteer organizations, individuals, who knows who else, making use of some of the older technologies that are proven to work, web rings, essentially, but a little bit more than that. So Project Act, just linking to that. It's still a single page as I'm speaking at the moment, but once I get this contributing document, I can move to some updating of static website, web page content. Agileforvolunteers.org is our initiative for a volunteer take across not just software, but across any contributions a volunteer might make to a civic volunteer organization, for example. So Agile for Volunteers is based on the first principles of the Agile Manifesto, avoiding some of the pitfalls and frustrations of the agile industrial complex. Stand-up meetings, no. How does that work? You can't get volunteers to spend time on that. So there are a few things that have been adapted, and it is an open project, an open initiative. Hopefully, if others choose to adopt it and find that it works and would like to contribute some examples or some adjustments, some tuning to make it work better, that is the so often forgotten clause of the Agile Manifesto. I think it's right towards the end. I don't think it's the final, but if you read through the actual manifesto, teams should always be trying to improve their process to make the best use of their time and effort. And that applies to volunteers as well, not just software, but everything. So everything should always be up for discussion and tuning, especially volunteers. You're not being paid to deal with bad process. Mastodon for Vegas, mastodon.vegas, will launch soon, very soon. I had said in the new year, it would be cool if it's up and running before CES. So I'll just leave that there. It's been on the back burner for some other stuff. The GitHub community health files, contributing being one of them. This is a link to a GitHub documentation document. Contributions. Creating a default community health file. So contribution is an important part of open source anything, right? People adding to the mix. So a community health file regards, so the code of conduct and contributing are two of the sort of the best known or most commonly found, sort of lay out the ground rules like I suggested about how to go about contributing. What does that mean? What can you not do? And so on. So if you set up a default community health file in the form of a contributing document, that would apply, so to speak, if people choose to read it. No, it would apply either way, read it or not, across the entire organization. So if we have our default contributing file set up, which is what we're talking about today, that would apply to all initiatives, all component projects, all repositories, and associated everything for our efforts. And finally, a link to our actual contributing document. It is the default as described. So it's in our .github directory of our Innovate for Vegas organization. So it's the default for the entire organization. It's what will you encounter if a particular repository does not have a contributing file. Unfortunately, well, it's not unfortunate. When you use the default contributing file scheme, it doesn't really get included if someone clones or otherwise downloads a repository. So there's an addenda scheme that will essentially, by definition, enable more easily reference, a binding reference. That is, there can be an addenda to this default contributing document per repository. And I think the plan really should be to include a contributing stub, at least, that refers back to the base document with any addenda, style guide, rules for naming things, etc. So essentially, hey, you're in a repository for a particular initiative or component project. Here's some of the ground rules for this one and how to best work with the others working on that particular thing. So we'll see. Anyway, you can read through the contributing document. It looks long. It kind of is. It can still use some refactoring. Some of the items in there can probably move to a governance document. So we'll see where things go in the very near term. I did have our contributing document reviewed by an attorney at one point, very early on, and hey, this is pretty good. You're not an attorney, are you? And I said, no, I'm not. So I guess it's okay. And we'll see. Hopefully, we never have to really find out. So we're approaching version 1. This document was initially created on June 28th, 2022, if you look through the revision history. We had only just incorporated our Nevada nonprofit on June 16th, 2022. So it was early days. It was not unreasonable back then as we were getting started, but clarity is a good thing, especially with our model. So having more detail and more things spelled out leads to fewer questions later. Initially, the notion of contributing seems pretty straightforward, but we might be thinking in terms of a single project we might find on GitHub or somewhere else, like GitLab or some other, repository somewhere else in the world. And let us be honest, you didn't read the contributing document there anyway, so why bother, right? Well, it's always good to have these things in writing, though, because read them or not, those words are there. And if a question or issue comes up, we can go to the document, especially when it comes to our planned diversity of initiatives, component projects, and entities in general. Entity is a nice generic term that is found throughout the contributing document. So it refers to what you probably would find in a repository, but it could be just about anything that people would contribute to. So including initiatives and component projects. Initiatives and component projects are described more in the Agile for Volunteers universe. So everything will start to merge together eventually. I had a neighbor across the street from me when I lived in Sunnyvale, California, and they used to play music really late, and there was a city statute that amplified sound equipment could not be used after 10 p.m. So I walked across the street, and I had printed out the statute, and I said, I'm just going to show this to you. We don't even have to discuss it because it's already written down. And he still got mad at me. But I said, hey, I'm not even complaining. I'm just telling you that this is what the city statute says. That's all. So having something in writing simplifies the discussion. Highlights of this document. What is a contribution? Since we're trying to encourage non-coders to participate in civic volunteer and innovation, we try to be clear that contribution can take many forms with a non-exhaustive list of examples. And throughout, there's an attempt to make the language compatible with non-software. So if you are contributing something, it isn't necessarily going to be a Python or JavaScript source file. It could be a thing. It could be abstracted to a language translation or content for a website or a picture. It could be just about anything. So trying to keep the language neutral regarding what the contribution is. And often with open source software projects, you will see contributor lists. Contributors is another document that's typically found in a repository. The contributors file will often mention the coders, the developers, but only the enlightened will include others, such as testers or people who took the time to file bugs or other contributors. So we're trying to make that a universal aspect of our organization, which I'll get to. So being clear about what it means to contribute and then why we're doing all this, it will require some more discussion, surely, but we'll see. But yeah, it's always good to have these things written down. Highlights of this thing. Wait, I already talked about that one. Ownership. I already talked about the first one. What is a contribution? Ownership is an important issue, especially when collaborating with others. The reason I didn't see that is because normally I scroll my notes, but I got off on my little tangent there. Ownership is important, especially when collaborating with others, and it is more than just software source code. Any contribution needs to be owned by the contributor. That is, you have the rights to contribute it. Like, hey, I'd like to contribute some money I just found in this guy's wallet. That's not your money. So you have to have the rights to contribute the software unencumbered, or you must otherwise possess that right. So that's typically found in the software world. So you do have the rights to this, and every once in a while somebody will get stuck with a copy-paste issue, or if someone contributes something, and it could be anything, source code or a design for a mechanical object or some documentation, copy-paste, right? It could be any contribution. Mostly of intellectual property, if you're contributing your time, that's yours. That's always yours. Unless you're being paid, then your time belongs to the person paying you. That gets a little complicated. We've already run into that a little bit 2 years ago. Yeah. The whole organization could be placed at risk, not to mention the place in the initiative where a tainted contribution was made. So if you copy paste some code from a project you're working on and you're getting paid for, maybe you're working for an actual employer, you say, oh, I can just copy paste this into this open source stuff and I'll contribute to the Open Transit initiative, or I'll contribute to the MyMuni initiative, and I'll just paste this in here. It'll be fine. And then someone says, hey, this looks exactly like our source code that this person was being paid to write. So now they didn't have the right to contribute that. So now we run into, do we have to remove it? Is that going to break stuff? Are we causing extra issues for people? So that's no good. That's no fun. So we're going to have to be attentive to this. And when I say the whole organization could be placed at risk, I would hope that a small civic volunteer charity organization would not be the subject of a lawsuit from big company, but it just creates a scenario that doesn't need to be created. Copyright assignment. So ownership is a thing, and what it means to contribute something that you do not own is you don't get to do that, or that you don't have rights to contribute. By the way, it is completely and totally possible to be paid by an employer. Intel, for example, when I worked there, they were paying employees to work on open source software, and you could contribute your changes to the Linux kernel or other drivers or other projects as related to the work that was being done. So Intel was a supporter financially by paying employees to do open source development work and contribute their work. So Intel would get attribution, as would the employee, the person making the contribution. But it was very clear that Intel is granting the rights to this intellectual property to be used with the appropriate licenses and so on. So it's important to be clear about that. Pardon me. Did I mention I'm getting over a cold from last week? Coming along nicely. Copyright assignment, something that some do not understand. And I am not an attorney, but it's in there. Copyright assignment is when you say, I'm going to hand this over to you, and now you own the copyright to what I have handed you. We were once asked if contributing anything to a project is signing away rights. In those words, am I signing away my rights? But in fact, you always own your own intellectual property unless you're paid for it. Then the person that paid you owns it. So if I have a thought and nobody else is paying me for it, it's my thought. If I write it down and contribute to an initiative or a component project of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, the copyright is assigned to the foundation of the thing I contributed. And moving forward, there's no trouble. It's a part of the project. The copyright applies to the entire repository and the related elements and so on. So, but I still have the thoughts in my head, and I can write them down on a separate piece of paper or equivalent. Doesn't mean I don't get to use my own thoughts anymore. So by assigning the copyright to the Innovate for Vegas Foundation of contributions, it makes life easier as the projects and initiatives move forward, so that there later are no issues with, hey, that's my copyright. Yeah, so it's been assigned. It's for all the world to see. However, attribution is what it is. You get full credit for it, and you still have the notion in your mind and have access to it immediately prior to contributing. It belongs to the contributor or the rightful owner. Of maybe they're the same person or entity. We added a grant back license provision, as the Free Software Foundation has, to clarify post-contribution use. So that is, when you make a contribution and you assign the copyright to Innovate for Vegas Foundation, you're immediately granted in perpetuity complete and total access to your own work that you've contributed in the form of a grant back license. So not only do you get to use your notions up to the point of contribution, but you get to use what you contributed after. You own what is in your head, and you own what you've added, or you have rights to. You own the rights to use what you've contributed. This becomes a little bit tricky, because if I have a file in a repository that says "Hello World," and I add a period or an exclamation point or a question mark, and I submit that as a change. Now I have submitted a single character, some punctuation, so I own that intellectual property, and I have a license to use that punctuation after the fact. This is obviously a contrived and absurd example, but I don't automatically have a license to use "Hello World" any way I choose, only my contribution to it. But what this does do is it enables contributors to a contribution to an open source project, when combined with the contribution of others, if all the contributors choose to collaborate to make use of their works the way they see fit, regardless of how Innovate for Vegas Foundation is using them. Now, you don't get to relicense the submitted contributions, but you can think about the stuff that you have in your head prior if that ever comes up. I'm not saying that would, but it gets tricky, and it's worth examining how open source and free software and licensing is a pain. But what does all this stuff mean? And I'm not an attorney. I'll say that again, just in case you didn't hear that in the back. But it's interesting to know at least something about how this stuff works. And you know what? I hope I'm not proven wrong in a devastating way. But we'll see. We'll see over time if we can get a couple of glances and clarifications as needed from that perspective. What does it really mean to contribute work to open source software? I mean, this has been going on for decades. We do use GPL v3 by default. Some people stick with GPL v2. That's always a possibility. We can vary per component project, which is a repository, as long as they're compatible with each other and so on. So anyway, that's a longer story. One of these days we'll have an attorney sit in and we can talk about all this stuff. More stuff, however, one aspect of our business model is the notion that we have initiatives that we own. So the initiatives are not proposed by an outside party. They're not a collaboration from the get-go with a non-government organization, with a municipality, etc. So we own these, so to speak. So we enable contribution from external contributors using the GitHub pull request scheme or something similar. So we're not saying, hey, this is an open source project, but we're only accepting submissions from members of the team because of a collaboration with a third party or a second party. So all of our initiatives are essentially open for contribution from people who want to do that. Someone might be a member of the team focused on the initiative. So for the purposes of our whole team approach and initiative oversight, they may have a little bit more access, you could say, I guess. They might even be a part of an outside contributing entity, whether another civic volunteer organization on the whole, or even a third-party company, which we're actually talking about. I've talked about this in a previous episode about our open transit initiative and working with a third-party company. Making these scenarios clear is no small part of the big updates of late. We should be clear up front. Always put it in writing if you can. So, minor participation is something we wanted to be clear about for various reasons. Basically, anyone who is not an adult, a United States age 18 adult, how this applies to contributors from other countries is tricky. So I think the language is adult where you are, but really when you get right down to it, probably needs to be an adult in the United States because that's where we are operating. I'll have to check that language. But it's important because contribution, so you need a parent or guardian. Just like when you're back in school and you had to have a permission slip from your parent or guardian to attend a field trip or similar, it's important because contribution leads to discussion. We might have hackathons, virtual or in person, around initiatives, and these engagements must be transparent and with full knowledge of the parent, of that parent or guardian, or maybe another one. But the fact is, you can't be surprised to learn that your minor child is interacting with adults in chat rooms, and so we try to avoid private chat rooms and so on. So the idea is to be transparent and provide a safe environment in our code of conduct and so on, so that people of any age should be able to contribute as long as everybody knows what's going on. So an attempt to make that more clear in the contribution document, we can clarify some of our code of conduct. And generally speaking, we want to be a safe place and not have any questions that could not be answered by everybody knew. Everybody knew that the transparency and clarity, and there was nobody disappearing and so conversation should be public, discussion should be public, meetup should be we always invite parents, by the way. Always bring your parent, no matter how old you are. Bring your parents along. So so trying to be clear on that point specifically, because the younger generation, up and comers, are likely to be civic volunteers to add to their resume, for better or worse. So we want to encourage minor participation, but we want to be clear and transparent with their parents. Another major focus of our organization is attribution, credit for your work. As I may have discussed previously in a previous episode, and is still the case today, unfortunately, an organization like Code for America, and I'm using that as an actual example, does not always make clear who the volunteer contributors were on their projects, with credit and kudos going to their paid employees first and often only. This is bad practice. Our use of GitHub and repositories, even for things that are not software, to track participation will help with that effort to make sure credit is given where credit is due. Just think about the credits at the end of a movie. They don't just list the actors that you saw on the screen. They list everybody down to the person. They list craft services, the caterer, right? They list everybody who made this project happen. That should be the same sort of thinking. So if we can use the tools to help to make sure we know who contributed a bug reporting, who was taking the time to write some stuff down that we need to fix, who was taking some time to write down some translations so we can make our initiatives more accessible to other people, who was working with accessibility, making sure that people with vision impairments could still use what we're working on, or hearing impairments, et cetera, et cetera. So some will question this approach that we're having everybody make use of GitHub. GitHub is a tool. You don't need to be a software developer to appreciate some of its features, but the alternative is already unacceptable, to just not keep track of who's adding to the value of the thing. The tools are available to remedy this. Some patience may be required for those new to repositories and issues and whatnot, but ultimately it will serve the goal, the overarching goal, which is to make sure if you contribute your time, effort, and expertise as a volunteer on a community elevating endeavor like our initiatives, your name, you can opt out, but your name should be right there next to everyone else's who made such a thing happen. And a couple other things. Addenda is a thing. Since we do intend to have many repositories that will make up various initiatives and their component projects and anything else, any other entities, more generically, we need to be able to make changes to the contributing document in some special cases. One of these being a specific workflow or other rules for contributing, maybe a style guide or additional requirements for testing. So in order to contribute to this repository, this component project or initiative, that, whatever the case may be, there are some additional considerations, or we need to change the way that was specified in the base document. So we enable addenda. That's a plural of addendum. You can add things. You can override, in fact. So you can override the base document. This enables a base contributing document, which is what I've linked to in the link section, for our entire organization with special cases as needed. Nothing too amazing here. Cascading style sheets do this. Contracts do this. Statutes, revised statutes. Look at your state or local revised statutes, and you will see that they always refer back to the original statute as written, and it changes something or amends something, etc. So amendments, addenda, take your pick. Some of the items spelled out in our contributing. Yeah. I really want to say contributor, but contributing. Some of the items spelled out in the contributing document, I'll typo there, int he, get that space in the correct place, will be moved to a base governance document to describe the GitHub team hierarchy across the organization and for each initiative and component project. So some of the governance, the way the different repositories and the overall initiative and how the teams work and all that can be spelled out in a governance document, so we don't need to carry all that weight in a single lengthy document. Might as well place the information where it wants to be found. Our use of Agile for volunteers across all initiatives spells out whole team and iterations and whatnot, but somewhere in the middle, so we can point to that. We can say, hey, we're following, in the governance document, we can say, hey, we're following the contributing rules. Those spell out what it means to make a contribution to any repository and any of the relations between repositories and so on. Agile for Volunteers, our initiative to sort of define some methods, not necessarily some rules, but some methods and maybe some tools and some terminology and some templates and so on to enable a volunteer contribution environment. We've talked about this in a previous episode. So we can apply that across all initiatives, but somewhere in the middle is the governance document, which says in this repository, here are the GitHub teams, and we're following the usual iterations for Agile for Volunteers. Iterations are 2 weeks or 1 week or a month or a year, whatever it is, and so on. So these things can all be spelled out per repository and in what we usually refer to as a well-known location. So somewhere in the middle, right there, governance. So the governance is one of those community health documents. Some clarity on the right to refuse contributions was added in there to our base contributing document. Contribution, contributing, contributor, they all sound like the same word at some point. So clarity, right to refuse. So there could be a violation of code of conduct. Somebody might be not following our code of conduct. So they should not be participating and contributing in our initiatives. Improper ownership, for example, suppose contributed work is paid for by an employer or some other entity. So the third party owns the work. That can lead to problems for us. So we can refuse that contribution even after the fact. So if we can be completely clear up front that we do have the right to refuse service to anyone, no shoes, no shirt, no service, that kind of thing. It keeps the integrity of the organization, the whole team, the efforts that everyone is putting in, their time, effort, and expertise, and not to mention the outcome, the output of our organization should hopefully be usable, community elevating things. Maybe they're software, maybe there's something else. We can't really put those at risk with people who don't follow the rules, causing problems for others, right? So it sounds like we're being some sort of draconian. No, it's really for the health of the organization, community health, right? So the right to refuse contributions for a couple of different reasons are important, and we've spelled out some of that. And really, I hope that those are never put to the test. But yeah, we'll see. So I'm going to leave it here for now. Take a glance through the contributing document if you are curious. And ideally, if you intend to participate in our organization or projects, or even if you're an external contributor and you want to issue a pull request, you should be aware of our contributing rules. They're guidelines maybe, but these are how we function, how we operate. We're writing it down, so it's in writing. And if you don't read them, they still apply. Hey, I didn't read that. Well, that's okay, because I did. So yeah, and again, this is specifically for the health of the organization, the people who are spending their time, the whole team, the integrity of the outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I can't overemphasize this. The minor participation stuff is important, and the contributing document is one place to be clear about this. The code of conduct, of course, and the general kind of upfront, hey, guess what? If you are going to participate, you have to be aware, even if you're not a minor, that there might be others who are. So parental permission, awareness, transparency, no surprises. These are important things, and they're probably worthy of a different episode entirely. But in the meantime, this being New Year's Eve, I'm hitting 35 minutes on my timer here. I'm going to guess with some truncating of silence, it will drop down to about 30 minutes. That seems like a good amount of time to spend on this for the very end, the final episode of 2024. The next time you hear this voice, it will be 2025. And really, I hope you're not listening to this on New Year's Eve. Hopefully you're enjoying the last final moments of this tumultuous year, because it's only going to get weirder. Take it easy. Happy New Year, and we'll catch you next time.